The world is shifting and new alliances are forming. Over the past few weeks, we have heard rumors that a European country is looking to attend the BRICS summit, but this isn't some random country in the Eurozone. It's one of the richest countries in the world, and more importantly, it is part of NATO and the G7, countries following the leadership of the United States. And we are, of course, talking about France. It's now official. Emmanuel Macron is knocking on the doors of BRICS and he wants to attend the upcoming summit in South Africa. We have France's foreign minister confirming that Macron wants to be the first Western leader to be invited to a BRICS summit. According to her, having a dialogue is always positive, even when we don't 100% agree on everything. And this is a very shocking development because the BRICS bloc is a direct competitor to the G7 and the United States. And make no mistake, Macron isn't going there for a social call. He wants to build deeper relations with the global south because he knows that's where the future is. Now, the decision lies with South Africa's President Ramaphosa whether France gets an invite or not, but this move alone tells us a pivot in the global order is coming. And it's really interesting to see Macron's sudden shift in attitude towards the BRICS bloc, especially after his trip to Beijing. It is as if a flip just switched in Macron's head and he had some epiphany. Now let's recall the fateful remark he made during his China visit. He mentioned how Europe must resist the pressure to become America's followers. The great risk Europe faces is being caught up in a crisis that prevents them from acting independently. And that's not all. Macron also hit back against the US dollar itself. The global reach of the dollar is a clear and present danger, and this is something that even France can't deny. It can force European countries to forgo business with third countries or risk sanctions violations. France is starting to build their own relations with the world, and they know the future is becoming multipolar. No one wants to be under the control of the United States. It's a big risk for your economy when a bigger power tells you what you can or can't do. And let's recognize the horrible situation Europe is caught up in. The Eurozone is officially in recession. Their economic growth is contracting faster than any projections from the IMF or the World Bank. We had headline after headline telling us that the EU is fine, there's no need to worry, and a recession can't possibly happen. But just this month, the truth is out. The EU has suffered 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP, the textbook definition of a recession, and France isn't looking too good either. If we zoom into the individual countries in Europe, we can see Germany, Netherlands, Lithuania, and Ireland all succumbing to a recession, and France is next on the chopping block. Their Q1 GDP is just 0.2%, which is an inch away from a contraction. And this is why France is preaching strategic autonomy. They want to make their own decisions, and it's very obvious why. By following America's lead, Europe cut off their supply of cheap energy from Russia, and this unleashed a wave of inflation that's destroying their industries. Consider these shocking headlines that underscores the state of the French economy. Airbus to double production in China as it moves ahead with new orders. And this agreement comes on the back of America's move to isolate Beijing from the rest of the world. And to accomplish this, the company is opening a second assembly line in Tianjin City. They aren't opening a factory in France or Germany but in China instead. And let's get this clear, no company will relocate their manufacturing to another country unless they really need to. Airbus is headquartered in France, so why are they building a second plant in China? It doesn't make sense, right? But because the Chinese have the demand, they have the money to buy all those planes, but more importantly, they are still buying cheap energy from Russia. So China has access to cheap energy for manufacturing, and that is an advantage. It's that simple. The economies of the EU just aren't profitable anymore, especially in manufacturing. Energy costs in Europe are higher and demand is contracting. So France has to look towards BRICS to grow their economy. Now on the BRICS side, they are open to receiving France, and it's very likely that an invitation to Macron might actually be sent. Now listen to what South Africa's foreign minister said. If that were to happen, this would be an innovation within the current BRICS participation model, but it would also amplify the BRICS Forum's global reach. This is a win-win proposition for France to attend the summit. Just an attendance itself will be a game changer. It shows the world that, hey, there are now alternatives for you outside of the Western system. Just take China's recent visit to Paris for example. They are moving to build more industrial supply chains between China and France, And this meeting was initiated by France, not China. So we know Macron is serious about engagement with China and the BRICS bloc. And if we look back at France buying natural gas from China using the yuan, it's obvious that France isn't afraid of moving away from the US dollar. They are seeing the bigger picture, especially when it comes to BRICS expansion. BRICS is drawing record membership bids from over 19 nations before the summit, but the main draw, the main event, the biggest win will be Saudi Arabia joining the bloc. Because if Saudis join BRICS, it'll be as good as the entire OPEC moving closer to the bloc. Take a look at the biggest oil producers in the world. Apart from the United States and Canada, they are either part of OPEC or BRICS. Saudi Arabia alone comes in above 12% of global production. And if we sum up all the production of countries either in BRICS or looking to join, we have an incredible 47.8%. That is almost half of the world's total energy supply. If energy is allowed to flow freely across the BRICS bloc, that means any American sanctions, especially those on energy, will be ineffective. If the price caps on Russia alone aren't really working, it is quite futile trying to sanction half of the world's production. And just recently, The Spectator published a shocking admission that the economic war against Russia has failed. The West has clobbered Russia with sanctions, a ton of embargoes and boycotts, hoping that their economy will crumble. But it just didn't happen. The Russian economy is still chugging along. And the main reason why was explained perfectly in the article. The West embarked on a sanctions war with an exaggerated sense of its own influence around the world. While the West wanted to stop global trade with Putin, countries like India and China said no. So centers of power are slowly shifting beneath our feet, and France is seeing the writing on the wall. It's better to take the first mover's advantage and build relations with BRICS while the rest of the West is still laughing away. So what France wants is to tap into the world's biggest economy. And let's take in some important facts that are undeniable. BRICS consists of over 40% of the world's population, contributing 31.5% of global GDP. Now contrast that with G7's economic share, which has fallen to 30%. And these are just the current members of BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So just imagine if more countries was to start to join the bloc, especially the Arab world. This will be a nightmare for the United States. And trading with BRICS is very appealing for France because the bloc will grow from strength to strength. Countries will be more keen to join BRICS versus any economic bloc within the West. The Saudi foreign minister said it best. During the BRICS meeting in Cape Town, Prince Faisal made this statement that tells us why BRICS will keep growing bigger than the G7. The kingdom shares basic values with the BRICS countries, represented in the belief that relations between countries were based on the principles of respect for sovereignty, non-interference, and adherence to international law. And let's focus on the word non-interference, and that means not interfering in a country's domestic matters. It means not imposing any foreign policy together with investment or trade deals. And this is a big reason why China managed to broker a peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but the United States couldn't. This one small detail is actually very huge, and it is enough to change the global order. As part of the agreement to restore diplomatic ties, both countries, Iran and Saudi Arabia, agreed to mind their own business. They affirmed the respect for the sovereignty of states and the non-interference in internal affairs of states. And this is a big blind spot that the West just can't seem to grasp. Every economic deal comes with human rights lectures that many nations are tired of. So if you're a country and you have to choose between the BRICS and the G7, the answer is quite obvious. One economy has already surpassed the other. They have most of the world's commodities, they have a huge consumer base, and most importantly, they won't interfere in your domestic affairs. And that's a really big draw, and that guarantees BRICS will continue to grow and expand their influence. And because of this expansion, the global financial system is about to enter a new era. It's going to be an era of de-dollarization and alternative currencies. And of all the European countries, France is likely the most open to trading with BRICS on their terms. Maybe you'll be using the euro, or maybe it might be the Chinese yuan, but we can be sure that the BRICS bloc is going to push for trade outside of the dollar. If the BRICS can drive enough economic demand, they can leverage that to get France and other countries to ditch the dollar. Let's consider this shocking example. A French shipping company, CMA CGM, recently placed a record order for container ships from China. That is the world's largest ship order worth over $3 billion. And guess which currency was used to settle the trade? It wasn't the US dollar, it wasn't the euro either, it was the Chinese yuan. And this is a big development because it wasn't China demanding France to accept yuan for payments. It was France that willingly paid in yuan to buy stuff from China. France is showing us that if the conditions are right, countries are willing to break away from the dollar system and use local currencies. And this move is fast becoming a reality. Countries are beginning to shift away from the dollar's hegemony. Pulling up a story from Bloomberg, central banks use record amount of yuan through PBOC swaps. And this move comes as more countries seek to reduce reliance on dollars. Because China exports almost everything to the world, countries are willing to trade using the yuan, even if they don't immediately hold it. Instead, they exchange their own local currency for the Chinese yuan using swap lines. Just look at the fateful year of 2022. This was when a bunch of storms collided together. We had the Ukraine war breaking out, the Federal Reserve raising interest rates, and the United States weaponizing the dollar. And what did that perfect storm lead to? An explosion of central banks rushing to get more yuan for their trade. Swap line use doubled from 50 billion yuan to over 100 billion within 18 months. And this is one avenue that BRICS can utilize to drive more trade across the world, including Europe and France. Just look at what China is doing. The PBOC just extended their bilateral swap lines with the ECB for another 3 years. And this is an enormous agreement that is worth 350 billion yuan or 45 billion euros. Now, what China is doing is giving Europe a way to trade directly with China outside of the dollar, which is a third-party currency in this case. By using a swap line, countries can effectively use their local currencies to buy Chinese goods. There's no need to go through the dollar system anymore, there's no currency risk, and you save on costs as well. So I believe it's quite likely that BRICS could in fact invite Macron over to the summit. It's quite hard to say if France will ever join BRICS as a full member because they are after all part of G7 and NATO. There's a lot of conflict there, but France could be one of the biggest trading partners with the BRICS nations. Macron is trying to open up the French economy outside of the usual G7 club because demand in those countries are already saturated. There isn't much room left to grow. Remember Blinken's failed trip to Saudi Arabia? Well, Macron flipped the script and had a successful meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince, and this included the signing of 24 agreements worth over $3 billion at the France-Saudi Investment Forum. And here's the big takeaway, MBS actually traveled all the way to Paris to meet Macron, which is a good sign for BRICS, especially if the kingdom joins the bloc. And as the United States loses influence in the Middle East, France is moving to capitalize on this weakness as well. So don't be surprised guys if Macron flies to Johannesburg, South Africa in August. And how does this affect de-dollarization? Well, it's another notch on the belt, it's part of death by a thousand cuts. And I'm not saying that France appearing at the BRICS summit will collapse the dollar, but it will most definitely accelerate the process of de-dollarization. The bigger BRICS becomes, the more bilateral trade they can push out to the rest of the world. And we will see the rise of alternative financing, alternative commodity supplies, and more importantly, currency options. So we shouldn't see this as France joining the BRICS agenda or betraying the West. Instead, we must recognize that France is simply positioning itself to win 10, 20, 30 years down the road. At the end of the day, the best deal on the table will always win. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Will BRICS send France an invite? Will this shift the balance of power? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.